Hello, everyone. It's so good to be with you today. I am excited to be back with you. I apologize for last week. I was so sick last week and even the week before that. But the week before that, I had Pastor Tamlin Sturman on, and she was able to carry the whole broadcast on her own. And so much thank you, Pastor Tamlin. I love you. I appreciate you. And you did help me out quite a bit there. But last week, I didn't have a guest on. And so because I couldn't talk without coughing, it just didn't happen. And you know what happens, and it is the season here in Canada for those kinds of things to be going around. So I do apologize. And let's get started for today. So what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about boundaries. And there's two areas I want to look at for this subject, and I'm going to break it into 2 weeks. So next week, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about boundaries and maybe some of those toxic relationships we have, some of those difficult relationships where people find it, uh, they need to put up a boundary with somebody who behaves badly or with somebody else's anger or, some of those other things, people who push your boundaries, your limits in a way that, is very, very unhealthy, like toxic relationships. That's what we're going to talk about this week. But today, what I want to start to touch on is I want to talk about personal boundaries, and I want to talk about those of us who might have been or maybe struggle with being a yes person, someone who wants to say yes to everything that comes down the pike. Yes to, I can do this. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll work in the nursery. Yes, I'll work in, I'll do the Bible study. Yes, I'll bake the cookies and I'll make the pie and I'll make the ham and I'll drive this person and I'll do maybe those kinds of things. That's what I want to talk about today. And so I want to talk about these personal boundaries that we need to set up because, when we don't have boundaries, we just find ourselves at the beck and call of everybody else, or we find ourselves at the end of the day frustrated and angry or irritated or taking it out on the people around us because our time is just cut so short. And we can do this at work, we could do this in church, we could do this with family and extended family. We can do this in the little league that our kids are a part of, and we might be the secretary or the president or whatever, and we just keep taking things on. And when we start to put up boundaries, what you need to understand is that it is good for you to put up your boundaries, but it's going to shift some of those relationships. It's going to shift the dynamics of relationships, and you may find yourself maybe not being as appreciated as you were when you always said yes. So I think it's only fair that I say that, because as you begin to take back some of your life, that does shift the way other people see you and how much you're going to be able to extend to them in your relationship. Now, maybe you've tried to say no before in the past. Maybe you have looked at things and you said, well, if I juggle this and I juggle this and I juggle that, then I can make everybody happy. Well, here's the reality. You can't. You just can't make everybody happy all of the time. And if you make everybody outside of you happy, are you happy? Is your family happy? Is your relationship with your husband or your wife, is it suffering? So these are some things that we're going to look at. And so, yes, we need to make that decision from the very beginning as we begin to set these boundaries in place. So the reality is that very often we have boundary issues because we grew up in a home where things were maybe not as ideal as they could have been. And nobody grew up in an ideal home. Let's just be honest. We grew up in homes where our parents put their stuff on us and we absorbed it as children. So when you start to, if you're even thinking about, even as I'm saying this, if you're feeling that knot in your stomach or a bit of a tension headache in your neck, or maybe you're just feeling the butterflies and the nervousness of you actually being able to say no to something, being able to put up those boundaries, I want you to know this. You probably need a little bit of inner healing. And so why is it that we struggle so much with maybe sometimes saying no to people and taking on more than we can chew, and not knowing how to be able to manage our time correctly? Well, that's a good question. So the first question we need to look at is, why do you feel the need to say yes to everything? Why do you feel the need to continually put yourself out there? Is it so that other people will like you? Where does that come from anyway? So my first question then would be, or my first statement would be, well, sometimes we feel this need to say yes because when we were a child, we weren't heard. Our voices were never heard. If we had an opinion, it was overlooked. And we just had to go along with whatever everybody else was doing. And, this has really been a thing for people that, are baby boomers, right? Because, we grew up in a home and, well, or at least our parents grew up in a home where children were to be seen and not heard. And so that means that you had to go along with everything. And when you went along with everything and you were compliant, then everything went well. So the first thing is, were you heard as a child? And if you were not heard, if that is the reason why you say yes to things is so that you'll be seen and you'll be heard, well, then we need to do a little bit of inner healing work around that. You need to be able to forgive your parents. You need to, be able to forgive the people who put you in that situation where it was a struggle, for you to be able to speak up and speak your mind. Maybe another reason why you struggle with being able to say no to some things and why you feel the need to take everything on that everybody asks you to do is maybe you were made to feel guilty when you were a child because you wanted to do something different. Maybe you were mocked or ridiculed or looked down on because maybe you didn't want to go skating. Maybe you wanted to stay in and read a book. Maybe you wanted to, sit and draw and do art and instead of going out and playing baseball, and that was frowned upon and that was looked down upon by people in your home or maybe even in school. If you're one of those artsy people, that can be a very real issue. Athletic people, they also struggle with the same thing in a different way. They don't want to sit down and read a book. They don't want to do some of those other things, and so sometimes we just don't always fit. And so if you're made to feel guilty when you're a child because you're being asked to do something that, everybody else is doing and you don't want to. And when you speak up, you're made to feel guilty until you do it because that's what makes everybody else happy. And then that way you don't need to hear about it the rest of the day. Well, we begin to learn at this point that maybe the best thing to do is to say yes. And we carry that with us through adulthood because we want to be accepted. We want to be a part of the team. We want to be somebody that, other people like to be around and, that they look at because you're the helper in the group. And so we might need to look at that, right? Another thing might be, was your perspective or your unique perspective taken into consideration as a child? You could be talking about something, Christmas dinner, what to do, or going out and how to do something on the farm, in a different way than the way it's always been done. If you come up with an idea about a way that's different that's been done, that can make you feel, and other people can make you feel like your response and your thought process is just absolutely not acceptable. And so again, you learn by the things that are said, the things that are done, and the looks that you get, the emotional feeling that's in the room. It's just better to do what other people want me to do. And so again, silence and compliance is the result of that. So were you blamed when other people, when you had a voice, when you said something, were you blamed for other people's reactions or responses? If you said something and somebody got drunk and you were blamed for that, or somebody got angry and lost their temper and punched a hole in the wall, were you blamed for that? If we're made to take responsibility for other people's actions and reactions and responses as a child, well, that doesn't have anything to do with you, really. That's them, and they need to learn how to deal with that. But if as a child, if that was something that was put on you, well, then how do you handle that? When you grow up, is it that you're thinking, well, if I don't do what's asked of me, then I'm going to get this reaction. I'm going to get this anger response. I'm going to get this depression and silence treatment. And I don't want the silent treatment, and I don't want the anger response, and I don't want the guilt and the manipulation that are going to go with it. So I'll just do it. These are some of the reasons why we become yes people. Another one might be, did you grow up in a home where one person had all the say? And I think, if you're over a certain age, that's definitely something that you might have struggled with, your mom or your dad, even today, depending on their emotional stabilities, I should say, that things just go the way they want them to go, because it's the walking on eggshells kind of a scenario where it's better if you just do what you're told and you do what they want so that they're happy. And it doesn't matter whether everybody else is happy, as long as they're happy, because if they're happy, then it's more peaceful in the home. And so, if only one person has the say, then if they ask you to do something, you don't have a choice. You don't have a voice. You just have to go and do what it is you've been asked to do. And so as we grow up, we get into this place where well, no, that's the way I was raised. And so I don't really have an option. I have to do what I'm told. So if you're asking me to do something, you're not really asking me, you're telling me to do it. And so therefore I actually have to do it. So that can be another reason. Another thing can be, did you learn that it was best to go with the flow and do as you're asked because the consequences were unpleasant? And again, this kind of goes back to the anger, and this kind of goes back to the silent treatment and the manipulation and all of those kinds of things. The consequences of saying no, in some homes can just last, it seems like, forever. And, there can be the little conversations or the little put downs or the little, snide remarks that go that, well, don't ask her or don't ask him because they're not going to do it. The consequences are unpleasant. And so it's just easier to go ahead and just do what you're asked because of the consequences and the responses. So, and the last one I want to look at is maybe you felt like the only time you were appreciated was when you helped or when you did the right things. So, this too can come from a place as a child where there's all this praise and admiration and applauding when, as a child you do something that you ought to. And this extends beyond, when a child is learning to walk or, when they're helping you put the groceries away in the best way that they possibly can when they're 1 and 2 years old. I mean, it becomes a really big deal, and you're really applauded if you do the right thing and appreciated and given special privileges as a child, when you do the dishes or, without being asked, or take out the garbage without being asked, or you just step up and you just do things. Now, I'm not saying that we should never appreciate those things, because of course we need to appreciate them, but it's the overextension of that applause and that appreciation as a child, because the opposite of that is when you don't do it. Again, the consequences can be the silent treatment. It could be anger. It could be resentment. It can be words that are thrown at you. And so we just learn that if I'm going to be appreciated, then the best thing that I can do is just to succeed. And, I can think about, one person that I knew that I had worked with a while back, and, she was somebody who was in the arts and entertainment. And so whenever she would do anything like singing or acting or dancing, she got a lot of applause and a lot of praise. And, when she did well, when she placed well, she was, given special privileges. They went out for dinner. They, gave her special treatment. They treated her differently than they treated her siblings. And it felt good. See, we like to feel good. And as children, we like to feel good. And so, that can be a real reason that underlies why we want to say yes, again, so that people like us, but also so that we become applauded, so that we get the accolades and, we feel good about ourselves because we're saying yes to something. But if any of these things, and there are other reasons as well, but these are some of the reasons I wanted to look at. If these are some of the reasons why you say yes to too many things, then the one thing that we need to do is we need to sit down and we need to determine why it is we feel that way and who it was that made us feel that way. So, if it's a parent, which oftentimes it is, and no shame on parents, like we do the best we can. But if that is where it came from, then we need to forgive them, and we need to do it in such a way that we're acknowledging what it is that they did that made us the yes person that we are. And so looking at those things, forgiving, releasing, and then being able to bless them if they're still alive, to be able to bless them and just ask the Lord to have his way in their life. These are all reasons that some of the reasons what we might need to look at. So forgiveness is always huge, and it really is one of the things that as we go through these lessons week by week that we're going to be looking at. We'll often come back to forgiveness, to forgiving those people who made you believe that the only time that you were acceptable and the only time that you deserved applause was when you did the things around you or acted in a specific way or measured up in a specific way. Now, I always think, when my youngest son, and both my kids danced, but my youngest son was, he had a specific individual that was about his age, and it kind of turned out to be about him. And when I had a conversation with his mother, she said to me, well, we just want him to feel good. It doesn't feel good when you lose. And I go, okay, but he's not the only child in this category. So if he wins, then everybody else is going to lose and they're going to feel bad about themselves, right? And that was just, I could see by the look on her face that this was not a thought that she'd actually had. She wanted her child to feel good about his accomplishments. And the thing is if we don't deal with that with children, we will have to deal with it at some point as an adult. And so we're not always going to be the first. We're not always going to be the best. We're not always going to be the one that gets all the accolades and the applause. We are going to make mistakes. And going back and forgiving the people who put that on you is a really big thing for us to do. So let's take a look at some of the things that you're going to need to understand and accept in your own life in order to be able to set up some boundaries, right? We need to, first of all, determine why we feel the need to be saying yes to everybody. And then we need to look at what are some of the other reasons, right? Like why we should put them up in the first place. Well, I think the first one is you have a right to your time. Did you know that? You have a right to your time, and you have a right, and your family has a right to your time. So in looking at this, knowing that you have a right to your time, if you're working full time, you've got kids in extracurricular activities, and you're involved in a lot of other things, well, who's going to pay the price? If you are always saying yes to everything, if you're always so busy and extended, who pays the price? Who suffers over the extended period of time, right? Is it you? Are you going to bed exhausted and only getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night because you've overextended yourself? Then your health suffers and you suffer. What about your relationship with your spouse? Is that suffering? Your children, your relationship with your children, is that suffering? And because we're Christians and we're on this, what about your relationship with the Lord? We can get so busy doing so many different things that we don't actually spend the time we need at the feet of Jesus. So we need to look at all of those things and put them into a nice, neat little boxes, or maybe make a chart or something and just go, how much time am I spending? How much time, quality time, do I have for each one of these? So who suffers? You have a right to your time. It's your time. It's your children's time. It's your spouse's time. It's God's time. And so where are you going to fit in all of these things? So I'm not ever saying that you should never say yes to the things that are brought your way, but I do think that we need to take a look at it and go, okay, is it something that's really doable? Is it something that I can actually manage, or am I cutting time off of different relationships in my world in order to make that happen? And I would encourage you not to cut off relationship or to take away relationship from those people that are most important to you, and that should include God, your spouse, and your children, and maybe even your parents if they're elderly, right? So taking a look at those things and making decisions based on on where you're at. Okay. So that would be that it bleeds into the next point that I have, which is to put your priorities in place. And so putting our priorities in place again is just looking at and going, okay, so we have to be realistic. I work from 9 till 5, but I actually have to get up at 6 because I have to get the kids off to school. I have to get ready. I have to commute. Then when I get home, I have to commute on my way home. So it's not just 9 to 5. It's actually probably closer from 6 to 6 that time is already blocked. And then is putting your priorities. What's important to you? What's the most important thing in your life right now? Is it the time that you spend with God? Is prayer a priority for you? Is that something that you have to make happen every day? Is reading the Bible and actually reading it in such a way that you're actually absorbing the words on the page, is that a priority in your world, right? Is spending one-on-one time with your children a priority, and one-on-one time with your spouse a priority? What are your priorities? Prioritize. Number one, what's first? Well, God should be first, but we already work 9 to 5. So that's 12 hours really with commute time. If you've got kids, it can be less than that. A lot of people work from home now, so that does make it a little bit easier, but it's looking at that and going, prioritizing. What is my number one priority? What's my number two priority? What's my number three priority? And what can I fit in around that that's going to be beneficial and not take away from these other things? So prioritizing. And then put those in place, and then determine that as you've put them in place, and as you've determined that you don't want these relationships or these things to suffer, then when you're asked to do things, now you can look at it honestly and go, no, I actually can't do that because I just don't have the time, right? And so again, I say this to you, these are the kinds of things that shift relationships that you're in. These are the kinds of things that shift, the relationship you might have with the person that you do the Bible study with, or the choir that you're involved in, or, the secretary that you are for, your son's dance club or your daughter's dance club or hockey or whatever it is that you're doing. These are things that are going to shift some of those relationships, because if you're not willing to cause other things to suffer in order to please other people that are not family and to make their life easier, well, that's something you need to consider, right? You need to look at those things, because there's going to be shifting and movement as you do these. And so the last thing is as you decide that you're going to make these decisions, and as you decide that you're going to put your priorities in order, and you're going to determine that you cannot do everything that comes your way, you've done your forgiving, you've looked at all of these, something that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to come up with a response, right? Before you end up having the no, I can't, I'm sorry conversation. And so I teach this. And so I have a lot of people that actually say no to me, who tend to say, because I'm safe, right? And so where they might find it a difficulty to say yes or to say no to other people, I'm an easy person for them to begin to say no to, because I will receive it and I will accept it. So, but trying to figure out what you're going to say if you're pushed. What is that going to look like? What does that push look like? They might want to manipulate you. Well, what am I going to do? I don't have anybody else to do it. Even as early as 7 years ago, 6 years ago, I got myself into a situation where somebody, and I don't sing. I used to sing. I don't sing now, but somebody was wanting me to do something and sing with them. And I said, I don't want to sing. I don't sing, right? So the answer is no. The manipulation was so thick and so heavy that at the end of the day, I ended up doing it because they're like, well, who do I have? I don't have anybody. I just have me. And I said that I was going to bring other people. Well, first of all, I knew that wasn't really my problem, but the reality is it didn't stop. And so I just finally said yes, just to get her to stop. And it ended up not being good because, that's not my thing. But I did say yes, and I did follow through with it. And I wouldn't do it again. But finding out what your reasoning is going to be, because they might push. There might be that extra added conversation that maybe doesn't need to happen, right? Like I said, how are you going to handle it? If you're made to feel guilty, well, then it's not going to happen because there's nobody's going to do it. That means that so and so is going to have to, stand out in the parking lot directing traffic for 4 hours instead of 2. Well, that's not fair to them. I understand that, but I'm sorry, I can't because, right? And you don't always need to have a reason. You just need to be able to say, I'm sorry, I'm just not available, right? I can't get here beforehand. And so it's just looking at how you might put an end to that conversation so that it doesn't snowball and just doesn't continue. And so, what are your reasons, right? Like, once you've determined that and you've determined what your priorities are and you're going to be strong, you need to pray about this as well. Coming into the presence of the Lord and just asking Him to help you to be strong, to keep your priorities, and to keep the things that are around you the things that are of utmost importance to Him and to you, and keeping your relationships strong. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, for boundaries around saying yes and being able to learn how to say no. Next week, like I said, it's going to be a little bit tougher because we're going to be talking about those toxic relationships. The ones where you go for Christmas and, grandpa gets drunk and starts behaving poorly, or all of a sudden, you're with family at a barbecue in the park and somebody gets, a little too happy and they start swearing and they're inappropriate. We're going to be talking about some of those things and how you can put up a boundary around relationships like that. When you see somebody call and you don't know how to get off the phone with them because they override, what you're saying, we're going to look at that next week. So join me next week as we continue this discussion on boundaries. And then after that, we're going to start looking at strongholds, and we're going to start to pull that apart a little bit more. I don't know how many weeks we're going to stay on that, but I thank you for joining me today, and I can't wait to be with you again next week. Thank you so much. Have a great day and be blessed in Jesus' name.